Welcome back to AIM Agenda. With me now from Melbourne, the Shadow Minister for Disabilities, Mitch Fifield. Good morning, Senator.
Morning, Kieran.
And with me here in the Canberra studio, Labor MP Andrew Leigh. Andrew, good morning to you.
G'day, Kieran.
I want to start with you, if I can,
Sure.
the carbon tax poll. I touched on it briefly with Bob Carter, but let's go through some of the numbers, if we can put them up on the screen for our viewers. 64% support an early election. Just over 20% believe that the Prime Minister has got a mandate for the carbon tax. This is an overwhelming number here for Tony Abbott, supporting his call for an election on this issue.
Well, Kieran, we've spoken before on this program about the fact that polls 2 years out from an election have absolutely no predictive power, and so I can understand why Mr Abbott is focusing on polls and running around the country doing a scare campaign, talking about an early election. And put yourself in Mr Abbott's shoes. This is the problem you have. You can't talk about the past because your past is work choices and ripping away Australian jobs and conditions. You can't talk about the future because you don't have a plan for schools, for hospitals, for dealing with climate change. So all you can do is talk about elections and run around breathlessly fear-mongering, and that's all we've seen from the
Andrew,
opposition.
What we saw there was, on the numbers there, including 58% opposing the tax. That was the number. Nearly 60% oppose the tax as it stands. 46% believe it's going to have a minor impact on the environment. You have one enormous task ahead of you, don't you, the government, to prosecute this?
Kieran, it's true we're up against a master of negative campaigning, but we've got to look at the policy here. This is a policy which will put a price on pollution for the 1,000 biggest polluters and provide generous assistance to Australian households. And that stands in stark contrast to Mr Abbott's policy, which, on the days when he has one at all, seems to be to subsidise big polluters. And we have to do this because it's a core economic reform as well as being a core environmental reform. The Australian economy is a very carbon-intensive one, so we need to make sure we're not left behind by the rest of the world as we move towards putting a price on carbon pollution.
Senator Fifield, this poll follows yesterday's protests around the country in support of a carbon tax. There were thousands out at protests around the capital cities, Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, some big crowds there. And if you look at this poll, nearly 30% support the carbon tax, even despite the government's poor sales efforts thus far. So they've got a base there to work with.
Well, there were massive crowds protesting the dismissal of the Whitlam government, but it still didn't stop people voting for the coalition in overwhelming numbers. The most interesting thing about this poll, I think, is that two-thirds of the respondents said that they think that there should be an election before a carbon tax is considered. The Australian people feel betrayed. Julia Gillard went to the last election and said that there would be no carbon tax under a government that she led. The other interesting thing in the poll is that 3/4 of respondents believe that they would be worse off under a carbon tax, that they wouldn't be able to afford to pay the extra impost on their household budgets. Now, I think the reason that the voting public think that is they just don't believe Julia Gillard. She says that they'll be better off, but she's lied to them before. She lied to them before saying that she wouldn't introduce a carbon tax. So the government really does need to heed this survey. It doesn't matter how many celebrities are deployed in the field or how many actors or actresses to try and explain this. The Australian public aren't convinced, and I think the Australian public are sick and tired when they express their concerns about cost of living pressures, when they express their concerns about a carbon tax. They're sick and tired of being labelled climate change sceptics. Australian households are doing it tough. They don't need an added burden on their household budgets, and it's time that this government started to listen.
Well, Senator Fifield, though, when these polls are done and compensation is included, the support number goes well up, doesn't it? This poll doesn't have that compensation question in there. When that's asked, the number invariably does go up according to the polls that we've seen.
Well, when I move around the community talking to people, no one believes that the compensation is going to adequately recompense them for the increase in petrol prices, for the increase in electricity prices. People just don't buy it.
But what happens when the tax cuts are implemented? You've run this campaign against the tax, the compensation. But when the government can say, OK, there are the dollars in your pocket, then you've got to argue, oh, we're rolling that back. It's a lot more difficult.
Well, we're conceding nothing. We're still fighting to stop this tax being introduced, and we're going to keep fighting for this tax to stop being introduced. And I think that the Australian public are going to make their feelings known, not just through this poll, but to their local Labor MPs. And I think the message will get through, and this government would be well advised to see a sign in front of them that says, wrong way, turn back.
Let's look at a few other issues if we can. The live cattle exports. Andrew Leigh, it looks like the government's considering, according to the Herald today, restricting the exports to just a handful of abattoirs. There will be pressure that remains to ban this trade altogether, but would that be an encouraging start to restrict it just to 10 or so abattoirs as opposed to the 100 where cattle are currently exported to?
Well, Kieran, I've seen the reports as well, and we'll have to wait and see what the Minister has to say about it. But certainly, like many of your viewers, I'm sure, I was shocked to see those images of Australian cattle being so horrendously treated in Indonesian abattoirs. Having the independent reviewer is important. We've shut down immediately exports of Australian cattle to those abattoirs, I'm looking forward to other moves.
More needs to be done.
Look, I think it's important to work through it with the assistance of the independent reviewer. Having that independent outside eye on this is absolutely critical, making sure we set in place a solution that isn't just some short-term fix, but actually is a substantive solution for the long term.
Senator Fifield, do you think that would be enough to restrict exports to only those that are guaranteed? I think the number was 10 or so that the Herald reported this morning.
Well, look, we don't want to make this an area of partisanship. Those images on Four Corners were truly horrific. No one wants to see that suffering by animals. We also have to consider the livelihood of Australian producers who rely on exports. I think the producers have shown themselves to be extremely responsible. They care equally about animal welfare. So, look, we're willing to work with the government in this area. We don't want to take pot shots. We want to see a situation where we have animals not suffering, but where we can also see a continued export industry.
There's one area where there isn't bipartisan support is asylum seekers. Malaysia, the deal with Malaysia is facing a lot of criticism, Andrew Leigh. Now within your own party, Melissa Parker, the member for Fremantle, says she's not going to back a plan if unaccompanied minors are being sent back to Malaysia. She wants a full endorsement from the United Nations as a former UN lawyer herself. This has been criticised right across the board. Julian Burnside, Marion Leigh, people now saying that Nauru is a better option than what your government is trotting out.
Well, Kieran, I think there's been a lot of misinformation around about unaccompanied minors. So let me just try and be absolutely clear about where the government's coming from on this. We have said that there shouldn't be a blanket exemption. If you set up a blanket exemption, you say that some category of people are automatically going to be exempted. That just encourages people smugglers to put that category of people on the boat, to put a boat full of unaccompanied minors. We could imagine the tragedy that occurred in Christmas Island being repeated in that circumstance. The UNHCR agrees with us on this. There shouldn't be a blanket exemption. That doesn't mean that the Minister doesn't retain his powers on a case-by-case basis to allow individual unaccompanied minors into the country. But the blanket ban is just a recipe for trouble. It fails to break the business model of the people smugglers, which is exactly what we're aiming to do.
You say you want to clear it up for us, but to be honest, it's been as clear as mud over the first few days, because the Minister says unaccompanied minors will be sent to Malaysia, and then he says the next day that it will be case by case. It seems like you're changing the position on a daily basis.
No, that's not right, Kieran. What the Minister has said is that there cannot be a blanket exemption. UNHCR agrees with this. You want to break the business model of the people smugglers. You want to make sure that they don't send kids to Australia and see a repeat of burying young children, as we had to do after Christmas Island. Then it's important. You don't have a blanket exemption, but you can be compassionate. compassionate on a case-by-case basis?
Well, compassionate. Julian Burnside, Marion Lay, these refugee advocates, Melissa Park, I mean, one of your own MPs, they don't think you've got it right.
Well, Kieran, I'm proud of what we've done as a government with refugees. We're increasing the refugee intake by 4,000, biggest increase since the Keating government. We've stopped temporary protection visas. We've taken kids out from behind razor wire. And this is about trying to break the business model of the people smugglers. It's not straightforward. No one thinks that this is an easy problem to solve. There are 15 million refugees around the world, and so Australia needs to be part of finding a regional solution to a global problem.
Okay, Senator Fifield, this issue looks like it's going to be finalised within the next couple of weeks, the deal with Malaysia, and if it does slow the boats, as the government is hoping it will, of course, how will you continue to oppose this as an option?
Well, Kieran, you're more optimistic than I am. We heard a lot about the East Timorese solution. Nothing eventuated. The government continued in that fantasy that was going to eventuate. We heard a little bit about a PNG solution for a while, but nothing came of that. I'm yet to be convinced that the Malaysian solution will actually be signed in ink. But, Kieran, I've got to say, if I hear a Labor Member of Parliament say one more time, we've got to break the business model, I'll scream. It's the Australian Labor Party that designed this business model. It's the Australian Labor Party that gave the people smugglers the product that they are currently selling. It's the Australian Labor Party who, through the abolition of temporary protection visas and through the refusal to continue the Nauru Processing Centre, have given the people smugglers the product that they are selling. So when the Labor Party say that they want to break the business model, it's their own model that they're looking to break. The only way they can break this business model is by adopting the coalition's policies, reopening Nauru. Pick up the phone, call the President of Nauru, reintroduce temporary protection visas. Let's stop this absolute farce that even Robert Mann recognises as a farce, that even Julian Burnside recognises as a farce, that even Marion Lay recognises as a farce. This government is operating in a parallel universe. They're talking to themselves. No one is listening to them. No one believes them. It's time to end this ridiculous situation and introduce temporary protection visas and pick up the phone, call the President of Nauru. Let's get over this ridiculous situation.
Okay, gentlemen, you've both had a decent go at that issue as well. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Senator Fifield and Andrew Lee, good to see you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Kieran.
That's all for this edition of AM Agenda. Ashley Gillen will be along at 1:30 Eastern for lunchtime. Agenda for now. Thanks for your company.